Hi, Wasfia.
Hi, Claudia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Welcome, everyone. Hi, Diane. Hi, Amy. I'm like, that's not Bob. Well, welcome, everyone. We're going to give everybody a 1 or 2 more minutes to join us this evening. Thank you all for being here and taking time out of your very, very busy and super packed schedules. I know we all share that. And I just want to say, you know, off the record, although I do see, Leslie, you're already recording this, but fine, you know, I'll go on record saying this, but incriminating evidence. And now I forgot what I was going to say. Well, what am I going to do? Don't judge me. All right, so let's see, maybe another few seconds. So while we wait for just a couple more seconds here, if you want to tell us where you're coming from or where you're logging in from, we could see how diverse and global our audience is this evening. Nigeria, welcome. Oh, no, that's Ms. Leslie. All right. I'm on fire today. So I know some of us are here in New York. What areas are you logging in from? East Village, Santa Rosa, California. Exciting. Philadelphia, New Jersey. Woohoo! Jersey City, Spain, Czech Republic, Saudi Arabia, Lower Manhattan. We have Pakistan, Yemen. Wow, that's amazing. Portchester, Lee Valley, Rome, Italy. Pleasantville, New York, Brooklyn.
Sounds like a bucket list.
Yes. Totally. Read my mind. New Zealand. All right. I'm very impressed with how worldly we all are here. But why don't we get started with the reason why we're all here this evening. Hello, my name is Claudia Carco. I'm the Assistant Dean of ESL at Westchester Community College. Our school is located in the beautiful campus. Well, the main campus is in Valhalla, New York, a little north of New York City, for those of you that are not from this area. As many of you know, we've been running these free webinars for our ELT community. So we're super excited that you're here. Today's presentation is being sponsored and supported and made possible by the Sophia and Joseph Abeleys Endowed Chair for English as a Second Language. A special thanks also to the Nice TESOL organization for sharing this event with their members and for giving them CTLE credits or a certificate of participation. If some of you are members, you can request this at the end of the session. My colleague, Ms. Leslie Painter-Farrell, is behind she's the mastermind behind these webinar series. So she has done all the work in getting our amazing speaker here tonight, Mr. Rod Ellis. As many of you know, Rod is a world-renowned leader in the field of SLA. Professor Ellis received his doctorate from the University of London and his Master of Education from the University of Bristol. He's a former professor at Temple University, both in Japan and in the US, and has served as the director of the Institute of Language Teaching and Learning at the University of Auckland. He is also an expert in second language acquisition and is the author of the Oxford University Press Duke of Edinburgh award-winning classic, The Study of Second Language Acquisition, as well as numerous student and teacher training textbooks for Prentice Hall and Oxford University Press. Without further ado, I present to you our speaker, Dr. Rod Ellis.
Well, first of all, thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Leslie, for inviting me to come and give a talk. It is a privilege to be able to give these talks, and it's kind of eye-opening to see that there are so many people from different parts of the world who have tuned in to it. I'm not going to directly talk about second language acquisition. I'm going to talk about really, in many ways, something that is an application of second language acquisition to language teaching, which is task-based language teaching. I do want to do a task with you towards the beginning of my talk. And if possible, could you just get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil? That's all you'll need. And then I can do the task with you. The other general piece of information I want to give is that there is a chat room. I can see many people have already actually entered the chat room. If you want to ask a question while I'm giving the talk, please write your question into the chat room. I probably won't look at your question as soon as you write it, but at the end of my talk, I will go to the chat room and I will look to see the questions that you put in. I plan to talk for around about 40 minutes and then give as much time as possible for your questions. Okay, here we go. Only we're not going because we are back into a problem that I had the other day, and that is that, oh, now it's moved. I had this the other day, that it seems to freeze. This is just the outline of my talk. I'm going to begin with a definition of what a task is, and then I'm going to look at different types of tasks and move on to talk about two ways of using tasks in language teaching. And then I'm going to actually report an evaluation of a task that one of my students carried out a little while ago, and then, of course, final comments. So that's where we're going. So first of all, then, what is a task? In the literature on task-based language teaching, you will find a lot of definitions of tasks. And this is my own definition. I define a task in terms of the criteria which a language teaching activity has to satisfy in order to be called a task. So the first thing is that there should be a primary focus on meaning. In other words, learners are not primarily focused on correct linguistic form. They are involved in trying to make meaning, understand meaning. There's some kind of gap, and those of you who are familiar with task-based language teaching will know that there are two main types of gap: an information gap and an opinion gap. The third criterion is, to my mind, one of the essential ones in task-based language teaching. The participants choose the linguistic and non-linguistic resources needed to complete the task. And the crucial word there is choose. In other words, the resources needed to complete the task come from the student, come from the learner, and they are not from the teacher. It's not the teacher who tells them what language they should use to do the task. They have to work out how to do the task using their existing resources. And a task has a clearly defined communicative outcome. Okay, so 4 criteria. And we can use those to try and decide whether an activity constitutes a task or not, whether it's more like an exercise. Well, here is the task that I'm going to do with you. You can see that there is a little map of an island there, and you can see that the map looks a little bit like a human face. So on your piece of paper, what I would like you to do is to just draw the outline of the island. Copy that outline onto your piece of paper. Try and make it reasonably big, because I'm going to tell you where those 7 places are located. Are you ready? Okay, I can see a few people nodding. So here we go. Okay, the first place is Betu, and Betu is situated on the nose of the island. It's about where the nostril of the nose is. So could you write Betu into your map? And then next, we have Songa. And Songa is situated on the other side of the island. It's under the ear of the island. Under the ear of the island, you'll see that there is an inlet from the sea. And Songa is situated at the end of that inlet. Now we have Bottomless Bay, and that is the name of the bay on which Betu is situated. So it's underneath the nose of the island. Mataka is a very small place, and it's situated in the neck of the island. It's not on the coast, it's a little bit inland, and it is situated in the middle of the neck of the island. I'm now going to do River Ilonga. I'll say that again so you can hear clearly, River Ilonga. And actually, before I do the rivers, I'm going to switch to 7 Iluba Mountains. The Iluba Mountains, they go across the top of the island, where the kind of forehead side of the side of the head is. And they go right across, but they do not come down to the coast on either side. So shade in where the Iluba Mountains are, making sure they don't come down all the way to the coast along the top of the island. And now I will do River Ilonga. The River Ilonga starts in the Iluba Mountains, and it runs down the island through Songa into the inlet on which Songa is situated. So please draw in the map and label it. And then finally, we got River Ironga, and that starts on the other side of the island. Again, it starts in the Iluba Mountains, on the left side of the Iluba Mountains, as you look at your map, and it runs down the island through Betu into Bottomless Bay. So could you draw in River Ironga? Okay. Now, I hope you didn't find that too challenging, too difficult, okay? But I'm sure you want to know how well you've done. And so you can now look at the answer, right? You can now look at the answer, and you can give yourself 1 mark for every place that you have got in the correct position and have labeled correctly. There are 7 places, so there are 7 marks for you. Okay, now I can't see you all, but I know that you are all obviously very proficient in English and very clever, and I'm sure you've all got 7 out of 7. Although I've often done this particular talk with face-to-face with an audience, and then I ask them how well they've done, who's got 7, who's got 6, who's got 5. I find that, in fact, there's quite a spread of marks on this, okay? Now, is this a task, right? Well, the first thing to note is that it's a listening task. You didn't have to speak. But there's nothing that says that tasks cannot be listening tasks. They don't have to be speaking tasks. And if we go back to my 4 criteria, I think you can see pretty clearly that it is a task. There's a primary focus on meaning, in this case, having to understand my description about where the different places on the map are. There's a gap because it's an information gap, because I know where these places are and you didn't. And so the purpose of the task was to close that gap. And you had to choose your own linguistic and non-linguistic resources. That is to say, I didn't teach you any of the language that you needed in order to understand my descriptions. I didn't teach you nostril, I didn't teach you inlet, right? But they were essential words for trying to understand. You had to do the best you can. And my guess is sometimes you had to guess a bit, which is non-linguistic resources. And there was a clearly defined outcome. And there it is. That's the outcome. It's the map with the different places written on them. So I think that this can definitely qualify as a task, right? A simple one. I think it's useful, sorry, it's useful to compare a task and an exercise. I tend to use the word activity to refer to any language teaching activity. That is to say, an activity can be a task, it can also be an exercise. And you can see I've got my 4 criteria for a task. And then on the other side, I've shown how an exercise differs by showing you the criteria for an exercise. It's a primary focus on using language correctly, no gap. It's text manipulating because you are given language and the exercise requires you to manipulate it in some way. For example, by filling in blanks or by using a model to help you to say something. Successful performance is no longer the performance of the task, it's have you used the target language, the target feature correctly, okay? So there are these essential differences between a task and an exercise. And I'm going to sort of build on that a little bit more by getting you to look at a couple of activities and try to decide whether you think these activities are tasks or exercises. So have a look at this one. I call it going shopping. And you can see that not all the items on Mary's shopping list are in Abdullah's store. And then it's a pair work activity. So one student works with another and they have to make conversations like this. Good morning, do you have any oranges? Well, in that case, it would be, no, I don't have any. Do you have any eggs? No, I don't have any. Do you have any flour? Yes, I have some, etc. Okay. Well, task or exercise? Well, to decide, you've got to go back to my 4 criteria. Would you say the primary focus is on meaning? Well, there is a focus on meaning, but whether it's the primary focus is perhaps another thing. But you could say that there's a focus on meaning. Is there a gap? No, no gap, because the students can see Mary's shopping list and Abdullah's store, so there's no gap. Do they have to use their own linguistic resources? No, they don't have to use their own linguistic resources because they're given a model, and all they've got to do is to fill in a missing word and then basically produce a ready-made answer, choose from a ready-made answer. Yes, I have some. No, I don't have any. So they're not using their own linguistic resources. The linguistic resources are given to them by the activity. And is there a communicative outcome? Not really. I mean, what they're doing here is simply practicing a grammatical structure. And I'm sure you can work out what the grammatical structure is. It's the use of some or any in questions and in responses to a question, etc. So I would say that this is quite clearly an exercise. It's actually what is sometimes called a contextualized grammar exercise. And so what I'm really trying to say in my talk is we need to avoid confusing contextualized grammar exercises with tasks. They are not the same thing. What about this? First thing to notice here is that you've got a student A who can see Mary's shopping list and a student B who has a list of things that are stocked in the store, etc. And once again, they have to work in pairs. Notice that they're now given a clear communicative purpose. That student A has to put ticks next to the items on the list that can be bought, and student B has to make a list of items that student A mentioned that are not stocked in the store. Now, the interesting thing is that we've got actually, in terms of the information that goes into the activity, we've got the same information, right? But I think this is clearly a task. The focus is on meaning. There is a gap because student A cannot see student B's list and vice versa. They have to use their own linguistic resources. There's no model given. And there is clearly a communicative outcome. The list that student A has to make and the list that student B has to make, etc. So this, to my mind, is a task. I think this task is quite an interesting one because it actually can be done at different levels by students who vary in proficiency a lot. So, you know, let me give it one way in which it might be done, right? Mary starts off and says, oranges, and student B says no. And student A says eggs, and student B says no. Flour, yes. In other words, it can be done in an enormously simple way like that. But because it's quite open, there's an opportunity for people to do it in a more elaborate way. So student A could say, good morning. Do you have any oranges? No, I'm very sorry. I don't have any today, right? So when people do this task, you're not really telling them what language, how they should do it. And what we know from research is that when learners are given this kind of task, they will do it in different ways. A beginner is likely to do oranges, no, eggs, no, flour, yes. But more able students, more proficient students have room for improvising and using a lot more language, etc. So you can have the same task that can work at different levels for different students. And the reason why that is the case is because a task does not specify what language students will have to use. okay? And that, I think, is a huge advantage. This slide simply talks about types of tasks, and I'm going to very quickly try to give you definitions of these different types of tasks. The first distinction is real-life tasks versus pedagogic tasks. Real-life tasks are tasks that correspond to target tasks that students will have to do in real life, right? So, for example, I don't know, they may need to call up their bank in order to deal with a problem that they have with their account. And we could build a task around that idea, and clearly that would be a real-life task. Pedagogic tasks are rather like the two tasks I've just shown you. The map task, I think, is a pedagogic task. Doesn't really correspond to anything that people have to do in real life. And similarly, what can you buy task also doesn't really correspond to what we do in real life now. Most people do their shopping in supermarkets and don't have to ask shopkeepers what they've got, etc. Right? Of course, that raises a very interesting question, and that is, should the tasks that we are using, should they be based on target tasks? Should they be real life tasks? Or should we use pedagogic tasks? And there is some discussion about this in the literature on task-based language teaching, with some people, like, for example, Michael Long, arguing that a task-based course should be based on target tasks. It should consist of real life tasks. I've argued for a more wider, broader position, suggesting that if we can identify specific target tasks that learners have to do, then yes, let's use real life tasks. But pedagogic tasks also have a place. And in some parts of the world, particularly EFL situations, the ones I know most about these days, places like Korea and China and Japan, I'm not sure that for certainly high school students that you can really talk about real life tasks, because they don't really have any target needs to use the language English outside the classroom. Input-based versus output-based tasks. I think this is a very important distinction, partly because there is some misunderstanding about task-based language teaching, namely that task-based language teaching always involves speaking tasks, but it needn't. It can also involve listening tasks or reading tasks, input-based, as well as speaking and writing tasks, output-based tasks. And obviously, if you're dealing with fairly low proficiency learners, you are probably going to use more input-based tasks than output-based tasks. Thinking about the task that I have shown you, the map task was clearly input-based, and the what can you buy is an output-based task. Closed versus open tasks is another important distinction. A closed task is a task where the communicative outcome is fixed. There's a definite, clear communicative outcome. Open tasks, on the other hand, are tasks where there is no fixed outcome. The outcome can be variable depending on how the students do the task. So if you look at the two tasks that I've shown you, the map task and the what can you buy task, I would say both of those are closed because there is a fixed outcome for each. The map with all the places in is one of the outcomes, and the other outcomes were the lists that the students make as they're doing the task. Closed. Closed tasks have a great advantage because you can very easily check up whether students have achieved the communicative outcome. In the map task, I can very quickly see how well you've done it by asking how many of those places you've written in the correct place, right? But closed tasks tend to be more limiting in the language that is used, and open tasks do provide more opportunity for the use of a wider variety of language, etc. I haven't given an example of an open task, but one open task that I often refer to is what I call the heart transplant task. And the heart transplant task is a task where students work in a group of 4, and each student is given information about one person that desperately needs a heart transplant. And they are then told that there is only one heart transplant available. And what they have to do is to share information about their person, the person that needs a heart transplant, with the other people in their group, and then discuss who they think should get the heart transplant, etc. Right? And that kind of task actually is a very skill integrated task because it can involve reading. They have to read about the information for their patient. It obviously involves speaking. They've got to tell the other students. It involves listening. They've got to listen to their other students. And it can involve writing, because we might ask the group to construct a report, which they submit about their reasons for why they have chosen the particular person that they think should get the heart transplant. Here and now and there and then tasks. Here and now tasks are usually tasks where students can see something, such as a diagram or an action, that will help them relate what they are hearing to or speaking to what they can see, a here and now. And a there and then task is where there is no diagram, there is no action that requires them. So open tasks tend to be there and then tasks. The heart transplant task is by and large a there and then task. The map task is clearly here and now. You could see the map, right? And similarly with what can you buy? Because you can see the lists. So there is, if you like, support for the students in what they're doing. That's also an important distinction, because if you have low proficiency learners, you probably need to rely more on here and now tasks, and with more proficient learners, there and then tasks. Another distinction is between unfocused and focused tasks. Unfocused tasks are tasks that have not been designed with any particular linguistic content in mind. So they haven't been designed to try to provide learners with the opportunity to process some specific linguistic structure, for example. A focus task, on the other hand, is a task that has been carefully designed to try to actually get learners or provide learners with the opportunity to use some particular structure, right? I think that both unfocused tasks and focused tasks have a place in language teaching. I think that, to my mind, in early stages in a course, might be better to focus on unfocused tasks, to use unfocused tasks, and to use focused tasks if you see that learners are having a problem with some particular aspect of language. So you design a task to give them an opportunity to develop that particular aspect. And teacher-generated versus learner-generated. Teacher-generated are tasks where the information is all generated by the teacher, and a learner-generated task is a task where the learners themselves generate the information that they are going to use to do the task. I think I have examples here. Oh, here's an information about focused tasks. They're quite difficult to design because a focused task must still satisfy my 4 criteria for a task. So we don't tell learners what the linguistic focus is. And it's quite difficult to design tasks that make the use of the particular linguistic structure that is the focus essential. but we can design tasks that make it useful. It's useful to use the structure to do the task, and perhaps also it's natural to use it. So designing focused tasks is quite problematic. And here is my example of a focused task. It's called Candidates for a Job. And in this task, there would actually be 4 applicants, but I've only given you the information for 2 of the applicants here. And basically, they got to choose a new English teacher to work in a private language school. And again, they have to decide which of these applicants is best suited to the position, etc. Now, if you look very carefully at the information that's given about Jock and Betty, you should be able to work out what the focus is in this task. Can you see? Has spent, has written, has lived. It's present perfect, okay? Actually, it's present perfect with a particular language function, the function of referring to some activity that they have completed at a non-specific time in the past, right? So that's what the focus of that particular task is. And as I said, if we're doing task-based language teaching, we would not tell them what the focus is. We would leave it up to them to decide whether they will actually make use of this particular grammatical structure or find some way around it and not use it, etc. This is information about teacher-generated and learner-generated. In a teacher-generated task, students work in pairs. Student A is given a picture and described it so that student B can draw it. After student B has finished, the students compare the 2 pictures. Why is it teacher-generated? Because the students are given the picture that they have to describe. Now look at the learner-generated. Student A draws a picture depicting something interesting that happened to him, her once. And he then describes the picture to student B, who tries to draw it. And then they compare their pictures afterwards. So in that one, they're not given the picture that they have to actually describe. They draw it themselves, etc. Now, there's been some quite interesting research done recently to see which of these sorts of tasks tends to generate more motivation, more language, a better affective response to doing the task. And the answer seems to be that learner-generated tasks do tend to be more motivating, do tend to generate a greater variety of language, etc. Right? So that's another important distinction. Now, why are we talking about all these types of tasks? Well, if someone is designing a task-based course, one of the things they have to decide is how do they construct a syllabus? How do they sequence tasks in a syllabus of tasks? And I think that this remains one of the ongoing problems and areas of research that people interested in task-based language teaching are pursuing, the idea of how we construct a sequence syllabus of tasks. What I have done on this slide is simply to give some sort of general ideas about what kinds of tasks are suitable for beginners, which ones are suitable for intermediate learners, advanced learners, and special purpose learners, etc. Drawing on that list of the different types of tasks that I've just gone through with you. Now I'm going to talk very quickly about 2 ways of using tasks in language teaching, and you may have come across this distinction. The distinction is task-based language teaching versus task-supported language teaching. And I'm going to start with task-supported language teaching. In task-supported language teaching, tasks constitute the final step in a sequence that begins with explicit presentation of a target structure. So in task-supported language teaching, you do tell the students what language they are supposed to try to use when they're doing the task. So it basically has two steps in it. First of all, the language item is presented to the learners with examples and perhaps an explanation. And then the task provides them with opportunities for using the item in free language production. And the task, of course, would have to be a focused task because it would be focused on the specific goal of the lesson. Task-supported language teaching, sorry, it shouldn't be TSLP, should be TSLT, is not quite the same as PPP. I'm sure many of you are familiar with PPP, because in PPP, there's a middle P, and in the middle P, there's sort of controlled practice exercise, present, controlled practice, pre-production, right? But in task-supported language teaching, there is actually no need for the middle P. You go directly from the presentation of the target feature to the task. Task-supported language teaching really draws on skill learning theory, which basically suggests that linguistic knowledge starts off as declarative knowledge. Declarative knowledge is knowledge about language. You know, I know that with third person S, you need to put an S on the end of the verb, etc. Declarative knowledge. And then there has to be practice, and the practice eventually helps the development of procedural knowledge, right? And this is also actually the learning theory that underlies PPP. So it underlies PPP and task-supported language teaching. I'm not a great supporter of task-supported language teaching, although I do feel that it has a place. Again, this is something that is argued amongst advocates of task-based language teaching. Some advocates, again, like Michael Long, tend to dislike task-supported language teaching, although they do admit that perhaps it might be an idea that teachers can start off doing task-supported language teaching and then gravitate to proper task-based language teaching. And these are the limitations. Strong interface position, explicit knowledge is converted into implicit knowledge. That's really, really argued a lot, right? And we do know that developing explicit knowledge it's not a guarantee that you're going to be able to convert it into implicit knowledge. It assumes that learners may not be developmentally ready to acquire the target language. It assumes they will be developmentally ready, but in fact, they might not be. And perhaps also when they're doing the task, they're going to instead see it as a practice activity rather than an opportunity for really free, genuine communication. And if it does achieve anything, perhaps it involves semi-automatized explicit knowledge, which is quite useful, rather than really genuine implicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge is the kind of knowledge that we have of our mother tongue and that we can develop in a second language. And of course, grammar is too complex to learn intentionally in this way. You know, there's no way that you can teach every particular linguistic feature in a language system. This is task-based language teaching. And you can see that the course consists of a series of tasks sequenced according to difficulty, can contain a mixture of focused and unfocused. There can be a pre-task phase of a lesson, and that can involve some direct teaching, but maybe not grammar, perhaps vocabulary. And meaning is primary, but attention to form is achieved through how the task is implemented. Task-based language teaching caters not to intentional language learning, but to incidental language acquisition. And what we mean by incidental language acquisition is that learners can pick up new language while they're working to achieve the outcome of the task. This is how it differs from task-supported language teaching. which caters to intentional language learning. This slide simply is there to try to show you about how incidental acquisition takes place. Learners are primarily focused on meaning, and acquisition occurs incidentally, but in two senses. Either it can occur in terms of getting greater control over the language you already partially know, or it can result in new language. Focus on form is a key feature of task-based language teaching. This is what happens while students are doing the task. And the idea is that while they're doing the task, their attention will be drawn to particular linguistic features, in particular, those particular features that they find problematic. I'm going a bit quickly now so I can get through and allow time for questions. And here is an example of how focus on form is done. The learner is telling a story and he says he passed his house, and the teacher recasts what the learner says by putting the verb into the past tense, passed his house, and then the learner uptakes it. So there's an example of how focus on form. And focus on form is an absolutely essential feature of task-based language teaching. Task-supported language teaching too. These are the advantages of task-based language teaching. Caters to learning incidentally. I think the second one is an interesting point, because when we're learning a language, we're not just learning grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation. We're learning how to use the language to interact. We're developing our interactional competence in the L2. And that's a very important plus for task-based language teaching. I think it's intrinsically motivating for students. And also, I think it also helps students to see whether any real language communicative ability is being developed, right? I'm going to go very quickly now, because I know we are getting towards the end and I've used up a lot of time. This is an example of my student evaluating a task, right? And I want to put this up here because I think it's a good idea for teachers to think about how they might evaluate a task, and maybe sometimes carry out evaluations of the tasks that they use in their own teaching. This is what it involves: finding out whether students enjoy doing the task, whether it results in the type of behavior that the teacher had in mind, and whether it actually results in acquisition. This is how you can actually do it, and I won't go through this slide, but I think that I can make the PowerPoint available and you can look at it in more detail. I want to go straight to Sharon Whippy's task evaluation. She had a pre-task and a main task, and this slide tells you what. In the input task, students were given a map and listened to directions. They had to draw the routes on the map. They could request clarification if they did not understand. So this was done with the teacher. And then the main task, they worked in pairs, and there were maps with 6 different locations marked on them, and they took turns describing the routes they took to get from one location to the other, and their partners had to draw the routes in, 15 minutes to do it. These are her students, 11 intermediate level students from a variety of countries. And this was carried out at a private language school attached to the University of Auckland called the English Language Academy. She had aims for her tasks, and these were what her aims were. She wanted them to use their own linguistic resources. She wanted them to deal with communication problems when they arose. She wanted to know whether they could complete the task successfully. And she was also interested in whether they found it enjoyable, right? She used what I call a student-based approach and a response-based approach. And this tells you the information that she collected, the data she collected. A questionnaire about different aspects of the lesson, and audio recordings of the students as they performed the task. And she also collected in their completed maps. This is the questionnaire, very, very simple. The idea is that this is something that teachers can do as part of their teaching. So we're not trying to develop a sophisticated research-oriented questionnaire. This is a questionnaire that the teacher can give to students at the end to see what they thought about doing the task. These are sample interactions from her recording of the lesson. Student 1 says, now to say this, pointing at traffic light symbol. So go, no, this one. I don't know. And then they turn to the teacher, how to say this, traffic lights. So it gives you an idea from this how learning can take place incidentally, okay? Here is another one. This is a pronunciation one. Student 1 says, go south along the high street. And student 2, along. And student says, go south, go to, south. And student 2 says, south. And student 1 says, south, S-O-U-T-H. And student 2 says, yeah, south, etc. So again, it gives you an example of how learning can take place through doing a task. She analyzed the interactions for evidence that the students were able to negotiate meaning when communication problems arose. She looked for evidence of what is called pushed output, and she looked at their questionnaire responses. Here are her results. Most of the students agreed the task was useful and fun. They all found the pre-task activity helpful. They approved of the time limit set for the task, but one student was negative about the task. Well, you know, if you're able to design a task which all your students think is great, then you are a remarkable teacher, okay? There's always one or two students who do not like what you do. Results 2, there was confusion about how to complete the task, but all the pairs could complete it successfully. They differed in the time it took them to do the task. Comprehension problems were addressed mainly by confirmation checks. Students had problems with each other's pronunciation. Not much evidence of pushed output, the use of more advanced language when they were speaking. And some students requested assistance from the teacher. These are the conclusions she came to when she did the task. It was clear that students responded to the task in different ways. Nothing new there. That will always happen in task-based language teaching. Setting a time limit had little overall effect on this task. She wanted to push them to try to do it correctly, but it didn't really seem to work. In general, though, the students demonstrated staying power. The task did result in interactionally authentic language use. I've given you some examples. And the task resulted in very short, simple turns, no long turns, no long sentences, no pushed output, right? And this led her to think about how to improve the task. She thought maybe some initial vocabulary input would help. Maybe giving them more planning time might have helped them to produce more complex language. But then she also felt perhaps it was the nature of the task itself that resulted in no pushed output. And maybe she needed a different kind of task to get pushed output, such as storytelling. And this is her final comment, which I will let you read. Whippy became an advocate of task-based language teaching. She was doing a course that I was teaching at the University of Auckland many years ago. And I used to get them to design their task and then to carry out an evaluation. And this process of designing a task and then evaluating yourself proved enormously illuminating to them regarding what's actually involved in task-based language teaching and what some of the problems are with it, okay? Conclusion is a set of final comments, which I'm not going to go through. You can look at it there. I could also suggest that there are some key questions that we need to think about with task-based language teaching. I won't go through those either. There are some references. And there is my final slide with my little dog there, not mine actually. Thank you for listening. And what I'm now going to do is to open up the chat. I see there's 55 things there. We don't have as much time as I'd hoped, but I will see what I can do. I'm going to go through your greetings quickly. Well, someone from Manchester, England. My goodness, there are a lot of different people here. Amazing. By the way, I'm not the father of SLA. In my opinion, the father of SLA was Pit Corder. But many of you probably never read anything by Pit Corder, but he is the one who really started us off thinking about it. Okay, good, you're putting in, looks like you've got things sorted out here. How can unfocused tasks help grammar learning if there shouldn't be a pre-designed target form from the task? Well, the answer is incidental learning. Incidental learning is not fixed. What learners get from a task is likely to vary. But I gave a couple of examples from Whippy's lesson, Sharon Whippy's lesson, one to do with the pronunciation of south, and one, a new lexical item, traffic lights, which they didn't know. So clearly, it can help them do that. And similarly with grammar learning, particularly through focus on form, when the teacher corrects learners. I gave you an example of that, when a learner was telling a story, didn't use the past tense, and the teacher corrected it. That kind of correction can help the process of the learner mastering past tense. So yeah, we can learn grammar, we can learn vocabulary, we can learn pronunciation, we can learn interactional abilities through doing tasks. I think I'd have to spend a lot of time answering this question. It's a good question. And the answer is that, yes, sometimes I think it might be a good idea to let learners plan what they're going to say before they start doing an information gap task, right? And that could even include writing down what they wanted to say. At other times, I think, no, we should try to encourage spontaneity. I mean, after all said and done, in real life oral communication, you don't have time to write down questions before you get started on communicating. So yes, sometimes I think it's a good idea, but it's not something that I think should be done all the time. Also a good question, really good question. Low proficiency learners can learn through task-based language teaching in much the same way as children learn their mother tongue. Now, when children are learning their mother tongue, they do produce broken language, but they are being spoken to by their parents. I think probably one of the things that underlies this question is a little bit of a miscomprehension. And that is that the only way that we can learn is through production. And we know very well that we don't need production in order to do some learning. We can learn through input. you know, and this is Stephen Krashen's great contribution, making us aware of just how important input is, etc. And yes, one can incidentally learn grammar through being exposed to it in input. This is what happens in first language acquisition. And as Krashen has argued and shown quite clearly, it's what happens in second language acquisition as well. Well, I like the thank yous. Thank you for the thank you. Oh, well, it's nice to hear that someone does know Pitcorder. He was one of the very first person to suggest that, you know, maybe we don't need to teach language in order for learners to learn it. And, you know, maybe we should rethink what we mean by teaching, not by teaching through telling them what they're supposed to learn, but through facilitating what they learn. This is a good question. How does TBLT differ from incidental learning happening outside the classroom? One of the main ways in which it differs is through what I call focus on form. The fact that learners' attention can be drawn to linguistic problems that they are having while they do the task through focus on form techniques, such as corrective feedback strategies, etc. This does happen outside the classroom, and we do know that mothers do it quite a lot with their children. Actually, mothers vary a lot. Some mothers are great recasters, recasting what their children said. Other mothers don't seem to do it so much, etc. But a key feature of TBLT is this focus on form. Another feature of TBLT that I've not talked about, because it would be a different talk, is how we design a complete lesson for TBLT. But there is the opportunity for a post-task stage, which follows the performance of the task. And then, of course, there can be more traditional direct language teaching. But the direct language teaching does not precede the task, it follows it. I'm not sure I quite get this question. What could a pre-task be considered as the work in the classroom and the use be the task? When we talk about a pre-task activity, we're usually thinking about something that we do to prepare students to do the task, not by teaching the language that they would need to do the task, but maybe by activating their schemata about the topic so that they're thinking about it, etc. Or in Sharon Whippy's lesson, she actually did a task with them as a pre-task and then put them into pair works afterwards to do basically a very similar task. So the pre-task sort of models what they have to do in the post-task. There's different things that you can do in the pre-task. And again, you know, that would be a kind of another talk. Okay, not sure I know what flipped Salter courses, how they fit together, but I'm glad to know that you're talking with Jane Willis, who of course has done so much to popularize task-based language teaching and also try to help it be practical. I should perhaps point out that advocates of task-based language teaching, of which I'm one, don't sort of agree on every detail. You know, Jane Willis, for example, argues that while students are doing the main task, the teacher should not interfere with correction. But as you can see, I've been talking about focus on form while students do the task, and that means do using corrective strategies like recasts, etc., to draw their attention to features. So there are differences between different advocates of task-based language teaching. And there are arguments for pro and con, but I must say, where focus on form is concerned, there's now a very large body of research that shows that if you draw learners' attention to the linguistic problems they have while they are doing a task, that definitely helps acquisition. And that would probably work against what Jane Willis is saying. Again, I think my answer to that question is focus on form. Focus on form happens outside the classroom, but often not a lot. But inside the classroom, particularly if it's the teacher doing the task with the students, there is the opportunity for the teacher to use a variety of strategies to focus learners' attention on form during the performance of the task. I've written an article on this, which is in System, which looks at different ways of doing focus on form. This is also a very common question I get. If you're introducing task-based language teaching with students who are resisting actually speaking or don't have the ability to do much communicative speaking, then the answer is that you should start off doing task-based language teaching with listening tasks, simple listening tasks, and maybe simple reading tasks if they can read the alphabet, an alphabetical writing system like English. So, you know, again, this problem arises because you're asking students to do speaking tasks before they're ready. And so be patient and focus more on doing listening tasks, reading tasks, etc., to build up communicative competence, and then gradually start to introduce simple speaking tasks. Yes, good, because I can't answer that question. So Judy can.
I think that was the last of the questions in the chat.
Well, more or less the end of my talk as well.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ellis. It was a pleasure having you with us today. And thank you all for coming. I hope to see you all very soon at our next webinar, and all the best for you, Dr. Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, right? This is actually my favorite talk that I give. And in many ways, I think it's my most successful talk. I hope that the people listening agree with that. Okay. Thank you all for coming and listening.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.